Welcome to Conversations to Inspire. I'm your host, Kim Adams, and I'm hoping the conversations that we have will inspire you to follow your dreams, change whatever you need to change in your life, and ultimately to find your groove in whatever way that looks for you. Now, today my guest is Jeff Hamaoui, who is the co-founder and head of education innovation at MEA, which we will find all about in a little while. And he also has an impressive portfolio of working in entrepreneurial space, in innovation, sustainable and regenerative agriculture. So really can be a wide-ranging conversation this morning, I think. So welcome, Jeff.
Welcome. I forget that it's the future for you. It's Tuesday morning, right?
It is indeed. So where are you coming from today, Jeff?
I'm in Santa Fe, where it's Monday afternoon, and we're in the States. They're headed towards Thanksgiving, so in the next couple of days, it's gonna all wrap up here, and people are eating turkeys and doing the thing.
So the eating season is commencing. So I think we
Yeah.
probably eat from now onwards to New Year, and then we all start our diets and gym memberships and all those wonderful promises that we make to ourselves. So you're in Santa Fe, and I know MEA, which I'll get you to speak about. It has a site, I guess, in Santa Fe, but also your primary location is Baja, California, I believe. So can you explain what MEA is all about?
Yeah. So MEA is based on a big idea, and the big idea is that, gosh, we're living longer. In 1900, we could have hoped and expected to live to around 47 years, 48 years old. So if you made 50 in 1900, you were happy. Times have changed, right? In the last 123 years, we've added another adulthood, basically, to our lives in terms of, instead of just living 20 to 50, we live 50 to 80. Life expectancy, I'm not sure what it is in Australia, but it's probably likely to be fairly similar with all the OECD countries. It's somewhere between 75 and... Yeah,
like
exactly.
that.
Yeah. And so, adulthood got longer, lifespan got longer, health span got longer. How good people feel as they age has changed. How physically fit and able to do things has changed. What hasn't changed is how people think and feel about getting older. Your podcast is about how you transition and how you change towards new dreams, new inspirations. Often people, as they're getting older, tend to feel more and more stuck, more and more unable to move. And part of that is that I don't think we realize, God, we've got more time than we realized. So really, MEA was founded as a place to give people a moment in midlife to kind of tap into who they are now, what they care about now, where they want to go, and how that might be different from the choices they made when they were 20, following the dreams and the ambitions of, say, their parents or their grandparents or their culture or whatever. We've gotten to know ourselves a little better at this age, and so I think are able to make very different choices.
Do you think it's for some people the challenge is that maybe we haven't gotten to know ourselves so well because of those exact things that you mentioned, our culture, our family expectations. Maybe we spent 20 to 50 following a profession that we thought was the ultimate success story, and we don't really know ourselves, and we're coming to the end of that profession, or we're starting to realize we don't even like that profession. And there's this sort of gap, there's this space that feels really weird and a bit scary.
Yes, you could write the script for what we're doing, 100%.
You're frozen.
And for so many of us, we arrive at this place feeling like I've climbed the mountain and I do not wish to be here, right? This doesn't suit me. And again, I think the proposal isn't that we know exactly what we want and who we are and where we want to go. It's let's create the space. Let's kind of get into that space where we can reimagine. What's interesting about transitions as we get older, particularly, is they tend to happen in isolation. You know, when you were a kid, you might have graduated school at the same time as your peers. You might have gone to university at the same time as some of your friends. You might have, gone on to your first job at the same time as some of your friends. But when as we get older, these big transitions maybe are empty nesting, right? Your children have left home, or as you said, you've decided that the job you're doing is no longer really what the hell you want to be doing, or whatever it is, right? Maybe you've been caring for your parents and suddenly they're no longer alive and your purposes are shifting. I think I think taking time with a group of other people that are in transition, with a group of other people that are looking what comes next, can be really helpful. It's a really helpful kind of different set of people reflecting, thinking, where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? So rather than the people in your life who are like, no, this is who you are, Kim. This is what you do for us.
So I'm wondering, is MEA wisdom, because I know wisdom's a big part of what MEA is about, and I guess stepping into our new wisdom. And I was thinking about this before the interview, that when we're becoming a woman or a man, there's sort of traditionally always been rites of passage almost that we go through, the puberty, and probably traditional cultures have more specific rites of passage. But like you say, because we never have until now lived much past 50, we don't really have a rite of passage. So is MEA wisdom about helping us provide that space for a rite of passage?
Yeah. And actually, we actively use rituals to help people kind of metabolize their own transitions. We sort of invent them, right? As you say, you kind of have your graduation. You might leave high school or university or wherever you got to there. And then pretty much it's watch and then death, the end. You know, it's a sort of, there's a dry patch for those types of rituals. So yeah, I think it's not all an academic experience. It can also be an interpersonal, a social experience. When was the last time you had a minute to make a group of new friends? When was the last time you had time to reflect on what you cared about? Your question, your last question, I don't think I really properly answered it. You said, some of us haven't got to know ourselves. And I think that's because, gosh, we've been running to get into a career or into a life or looking after children or whatever it is that's been involving us. At this age, in sort of 40s and 50s, we often we're called the sandwich generation. You're looking after the people above you, your parents, and so on and so forth. You're looking after the people, who are following you, your children, and so on. Oftentimes you're looking after colleagues, businesses. There's a whole slew of other things that you might be involved in, community type work. And there isn't time to say, well, what does Jeff want or what does Kim want? And so actually, I think more often than not, people come to kind of dig into themselves and say, what's going on? Who am I? Who do I want to be in this situation?
Yeah, and I think I see that people need help with that because we haven't become very skillful at doing that unless you're someone who's maybe been into that self-exploration throughout your life. If you haven't done that before, I mean, I was teaching some yoga for a while there. I've stopped at the moment, but it's amazing how many people feel really uncomfortable with silence. And that's the discomfort of silence is almost quickly, let's find something to fill that space. So we
Mm.
sort of block ourselves. So what sort of things do you do at MEA to help people sit in that space that probably feels really uncomfortable?
Ugh. Um, when I first started this work, as you said, I came out of kind of the sustainability and innovation space. So I'd been working in Northern California, setting up incubators and business incubators and accelerators and all the techie things, right? All the kind of the fast paced, fast life type work, venture capital, all of that type of stuff. If you'd asked me about silence and my practices or whatever, I think my answer would have been like, that sounds nice. It's not for me. And if we were close, I would have told you, oh my God, that just sounds like a bunch of crap. I just can't deal with it. It's all so self-indulgent and so on and so
Mm.
forth. So I arrived at my very first ever retreat in Baja, and everyone was wearing these kind of white smocks and feathers and hats and, you know, looking deeply into each other's eyes and asking each other, about space and silence and meditation and all of this stuff. And honestly, I found it very intimidating, Kim. I found it very exclusive. There was a whole language that surrounded that type of work that I wasn't familiar with, I wasn't comfortable with, and I certainly wasn't competent in. So one of the things that we've tried to do at MEA consciously is say, can we peel away all the BS? Can we take away all the kind of the fluff and the kind of the woo-woo to all of this and make this work approachable? Use normal language, use natural language, recognize the things that people do in their everyday lives as practices. Whatever it is that you do to ground yourself, whether it's walking in nature or taking a surf or watching, there was one lady I remember particularly who tells this story about every morning she'd have a cup of tea and in the window would watch the birds come and feed off of her feeder. And that was her meditation. And in many ways, trying to sort of legitimize anything that we're doing to connect to ourselves, to pay attention to ourselves, and taking away, because I'm not sure that what people are uncomfortable with is silence. I think that what's uncomfortable for people is the sense that we're doing something and I might be doing it wrong, you know? And so how do you not stigmatize, how do you strip away the language that makes that uneasy for people? How do you make it as normal and as human as possible? So that's a big part of what we do. We do explore things like how do you pay attention? What are the things that you do? But I certainly am really keen to see it be whatever we're all trying is pretty legitimate. And how do you get deeper into whatever it is that you're doing? Yeah.
I love that because I think I've gone through my own journey with that. All my life, I've been interested in yoga and meditation, but I'm also a bit bogan, which is, I guess,
Yeah,
country.
I know what a
Yep,
bogan
you know
is.
what bogan is? Yep. And I swear, and I like a drink. And I often, for years, I think I felt conflicted that I wasn't like the people in the flowing clothes who was really comfortable with sitting holding hands while we meditate. That was just ick for me. But to
Mhm.
come to the realization that I can have my own form of silence or going within, and that might look really basic, like just going for a walk in the rainforest, or I believe you surf, surfing, going out in nature and doing something. So I
Mhm.
love that we're getting to that place now where self-exploration or spirituality or whatever it is you want to call it can be whatever you want it to be if it works for you.
Yeah, and you don't have to be something, some
Mm,
type of a person to care about. I'm writing a book about men's feelings, and please don't make the joke about it being a very short book, uh, but
I wouldn't do
um,
that. I only
uh,
just met you.
yeah, but I think the world is opening up to these types of things, and putting barriers to entry, whether they're how you dress or how you speak or all of those types of barriers that we all do, right? Whether you're a football fan or
Mm,
a rugby
mm,
fan or whatever it is that you're a fan of, the way you speak, the things you know, often keep people out of the things that you're involved in. So, how do we keep people in? How do we bring people in? How do we make it more accepting? I love that you brought up bogans, by the way. It's my favorite, all time favorite Australian word of all time. It really is.
It
And
encapsulates a lot in one word.
it does. It so does. But yeah, mindfulness for bogans. Screw it. Let's just go there. Let's talk
Yeah,
about that. And
yeah.
it's and that to me was the essence of all of this work. Was I had such a resistance to it, and it has been interesting for me. I've gained a lot from it. It's been valuable to me. So a lot of my work, a lot of my research and thinking over the last years has been, how do I make it more approachable, but also how do I find other avenues in? How do I legitimize the way that we're doing things? And it turns out, we mentioned surfing. There's a fantastic book called Blue Mind, and it talks about the health benefits, the sort of physical, emotional, and neurological benefits of immersing yourself in the ocean, right? So it turns out, well, that surfing thing, it wasn't just goofing off. There was a lot going on there that was really powerful for me personally. I listened to a lot of music. And again, gosh, music is just a fun thing, right? It's something that we all enjoy doing. But it turns out that as a species, we've been listening to music for 40,000 years, right? Or making music. The first instruments they found are 40,000-year-old bone flutes. Music predates language. Music is the sort of the language of emotions in so many ways. And the more I looked into the research around music, I was like, holy crap, music is even more powerful for us than almost any other practice, right? Listening to music in terms of, again, brain health, emotional health, resilience, processing our emotions, anger, fear, rage, happiness, all of this type of stuff. And what it all started to shed light on was, I think there's always this sense that there's a right way to be mindful, right? You need to have the white dress, you need to have the feathers, and so on. And the truth is, I think instinctively we know what it is that works for us, and I think instinctively we know what we care about, what makes us feel more connected. And to your work, in terms of, as you're trying to move towards something different, having any way to connect to what it is that you care about, anyway, is really important. Any way to find that moment of silence or dissonance, right? Because that's really what it's about. It's like, Jesus, I'm not happy right now. This is not working for me. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of people kind of building their own paths, their own wellness paths, their own wellness kind of practices, and just trying to make it as easy to access as possible.
I love that you're doing the book for men, because I think that's a prime example of exclusion from this space over the years, because mainly it's women who are doing self-exploration or looking more deeply, and self-care and all that sort of thing, because it looks a certain way, which doesn't look like a masculine man's way of approaching feelings or self-exploration. So opening that up, I think, is much needed in this day and age. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah,
Good
and
stuff.
I'm not. The proposal isn't that we all sort of start weeping into each other's teacups. It's more, if you don't know how to feel, then you don't know if you feel good or bad, and so you can't feel better. It's not complicated, right?
And I just reflect, I'll drop in my partner and his group of middle-aged men who do workouts down the beach every morning together. And that I see is, I look at that and I see them together, and that's their mental health. They get
Yeah.
together, they work out, they do physical exercise, then they sit around and have a coffee. They talk about personal stuff, what's going on, they help each other out. And that to me is the perfect, you know, manly way for them to do something without having to sugarcoat it with fancy brand name
Kim,
outfits
I
or going
lost
to
you for a
certain
second there.
places. Sorry?
I lost you for a second there. Let's.
Yeah.
You were talking about the perfect workout and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's just a very simple, like it's not over manufactured. They just get together, work out, have a coffee and talk about their lives. And but it's so supportive, and such an opportunity where they share all those things that we want to label, but it's just them getting together in their group. Simple. Like you say, it doesn't need to be complicated. Moving on to mention doing the sustainability and regenerative work that you're doing. Now, for me, when I think of regeneration, the first thing I think of is going back and replanting after mining companies have destroyed land or there's been some devastation. What's your approach, or what angle do you work with regenerative agriculture? It's one of the hardest words for me to say, regenerative. And when I saw this in your bio, I was like, oh, I'm going to stuff
No.
this up. Yeah.
Let's just say regen.
Yeah, regen. What's regen agriculture all about, Jeff?
Yeah. So if you're interested in the sort of the broader concept of regeneration, one of the people that teaches at MEA is a guy called Paul Hawken. Paul Hawken, Hawken, and he wrote a book called Regeneration. And actually, really, it as a book, it covers all kinds of social, environmental, cultural issues that we're going to need to address if we want to bring the planet back. I'm kind of a living study of how the environmental movement has changed over the last 30 years. I got in super young. I got in my early 20s. And I was doing kind of private equity investment and grants with a Swiss multi-billionaire, a guy called Stefan Schmidt-Heine, really in the early days of this movement. And the buzzword then was sustainability. So 30 years ago, the big thought was, how can we sustain what we have, right? Wildlife, etc., the climate, the atmosphere, and so on. As my career shifted, we've pivoted. The word has pivoted towards regeneration, and what regeneration basically means is bringing systems back. So we're no longer talking about sustaining systems. Natural systems or whatever, it's regenerating them. It is bringing them back piece by piece. That means different things in different areas, right? You mentioned farming and agriculture. What that has actually meant in agriculture is, instead of focusing on the crop, you focus on the soil. You focus on what's going on underground. And the big insight of regenerative farming, regenerative agriculture is, wow, there is a ton of traditional wisdom, traditional knowledge. I'm sure super rich in both Australia and New Zealand in terms of how we look after the soil so that it looks after us. I know that there's been a lot of traditional burns and all sorts of land management techniques in Australia that have been around for millennia, right? Same in the States, same in Mexico, where I work. In Mexico, there was a regenerative practice that basically created extremely good soil health. So you didn't need to have fertilizers, you didn't need to have pesticides, you didn't need to have all sorts of other things, because one plant kind of fed another under the ground. The system was called the Three Sisters, and it is corn, beans, and squash, essentially. And what was fascinating about this regenerative system, this traditional way of farming, is not only did it look after the soil and give you a much richer crop, it also was a perfectly balanced diet for human beings. If you ate those three things together, it was a great diet. So there's just to me, it's just been a fascinating journey of, how do you bring soil back? How do you kind of take what is often dirt? When you use a bunch of chemicals on soil, you're killing everything that was underneath, under the ground. How do you bring that back? How do you bring back the billions of microbial life forms, the mycorrhizal systems, the kind of the fungal systems, and so on, that kind of create a rich soil? And then inevitably, because I'm super dorky, how do you think about that for yourself? How do you think about that at an individual level, right? How do you think about regenerating your own soil, your own self? Before you make those big transitions, before you go after your dreams, there's this point in every pendulum swing, right, where we're at the bottom. And I often find people, especially very driven and successful people, that come to us and they're like, okay, I've just done this big thing and I'm now wanting to do the next big thing, and off we go, and I've got a week and I'm going to work my shit out and off we go. And it turns out that if you're actually going to change, if you're actually going to do something different, you may need to be stuck for a while. You may need to be stopped for a while. You may need to be kind of reflecting on what comes next, learning something different, creating something different for a while. And you talked about space and silence. People are definitely uncomfortable with that, as you suggested. People are tremendously uncomfortable with the idea that to become whatever comes next in my life, I may need to take a pause. I may need to not do what I know how to do. I may need to learn how to do something completely different. And as you get older, that sense of being lost, faking it, you remember as kids, we were kind of constantly faking it. That becomes harder and harder for us to do. And yet, if we can sort of reframe that thought towards being explorers and finding new things for this second adulthood, learning new things, then these adventures, these places that we might go, become easier to embrace, right? If you're constantly like, oh crap, I'm faking it, that's really hard.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about that. We also work with people an awful lot on their mindsets. Not only do you have personal self-limiting beliefs, but you have societal beliefs. You have familial, professional, right? So, if you were to turn around and say to your family, I'm going to become a doctor, or I'm going to become a juggler, or whatever the hell you were to decide to do, I'm sure you'd get all sorts of feedback, right? That wasn't necessarily like, you go for it,
Yep.
So working through that for ourselves, working through that in our friend and family groups, and then realizing, my goodness, we are bombarded by media messaging that basically says, you can't do it. You can't, you're too old. These things there's a sort of an addiction to youth in Western culture, certainly, that often makes it feel like this process of self-regeneration, this process of pausing and finding something new might not be okay.
One of my favourite words for this year has been liminal, and the idea of being a liminal space, that space in between, exactly what you're talking about. And there is that sense that I guess it's FOMO, that fear of missing out, that if I don't act now, I'm going to miss out. And that is, I found personally for me this year was something that I had to work through as I've changed from my career into doing some other things and not really knowing what those things are, to be honest, and being
Yeah,
comfortable in that space of, okay, this is just a creative
yeah.
space. Let's see where it
And
goes.
not knowing what those things are, and again, Kim, you dropped, so I may be talking over you, and I'm sorry. Not knowing what those things are, and that's fine if you're loaded, right? It's fine to take an adventure if money's not a problem and the mortgage is covered and everything's fine. What if you're paying for university for your children? What if you're paying for a mortgage or whatever the financial pressures are, those that have got you? What if you're not even making rent this month? Again, these ideas of, well, just, take a pause and find out what flows. It all sounds very unrealistic, right? So I think part of it is realizing that we can, no matter where we are, no matter how much money we do or don't have, we are able to say, okay, I need to keep working, but I am looking for the next thing. I want to learn something else. I want to grow in a new direction. I think one of the problems with a lot of this wellness type work is it feels hyper privileged. It
Yeah.
feels like, God, who has the time or the money to take a week off to go and sort of pamper themselves or think about what's coming next? At MEA, we actually are a for benefit, social enterprise. We give scholarships, up to a couple of $1 million worth of scholarships already. And what we're trying to do is open this up to people who can't necessarily afford it. And honestly, even then, when we give people a full ride or whatever, even then it's privileged to come to Mexico or come to sort of wherever, flights, time off, not being paid for a week. But, you know, that kind of led us down the path of, well, could we do online products? Could we create something that was more scalable, more accessible to people? It's not just language that you're trying to bring the barrier down to, it's access to these tools, to this type of thinking, so that people can try it for themselves. We've been all over the place, Kim. Are we answering the questions you want to answer?
We are. We are.
Good.
I like going all over the place because sometimes you never know where you'll end up.
Mm-hmm.
How did you really, I guess, take that step? Because it sounds like you're doing that much, even though it was similar work around sustainability, it was at that larger corporate level,
Yeah.
to being involved in MEA wisdom, running workshops and retreats. Was that a big shift for you, or was that sort of a really easeful, organic process?
Uh,
He laughed.
um, he laughs. I was going to go back up to North. I drove down to Mexico in a truck with my kids, with my wife and my two children and my dog. And we were going to take 6 months off to build a surf house and kind of consider what came next. We were both fried. We had two young children, a 3 and a 4-year-old. And there was this sort of moment where a doctor said to my wife, actually, it's like, you can either go on meds because of the stress and the anxiety, or you can change your life. And I remember the two of us just looking at each other and thinking, what are we doing that is so valuable, that is so important to us, that we can't change our lives for this? And that we literally, I was running my own company. I talked to my partners, and 6 months later, I was out, and we were driving down the coast. So if you turn right, well, actually, no, I guess, yeah, no, from where I was living, if you turn right out of Northern California down the 101, and drive for about 26 hours, you end up in this small town in Mexico called Pescadero. And that's where I found my two partners, a guy called Chip Conley, who was the founder of MEA originally. And he'd written a book on essentially becoming a modern elder, and how his own experiences working at Airbnb had driven him to reframe aging. And Christine Sperber, who was a local hotelier and sort of entrepreneur in the area, and hellraiser in the area. And the three of us kind of came together organically.
Yep.
If you'd asked me for any of the 47 years prior to me arriving in Baja whether I was going to end up being a desert guru type of character, I'd have told you absolutely not. It's just not, it was just never in my stars. I just never cared about that stuff. How did I find the transition? For the first year, Kim, I was so tied up in knots about being an imposter that I could sometimes barely talk. I was so anxious and nervous about teaching this stuff I felt like a complete fraud the entire time. I then went into real estate development, and we built a regenerative community around a small farm there. And I felt exactly the same about that, which is, I think, why I had to get super comfortable with this idea of like, you can't think of it as being a fraud, because then you're never going to do anything. You have to think about it as explorations, right? I was like, oh crap, what am I doing?
Oh, look, I love that approach. And I think for me, that is just one of the biggest messages for anyone listening. It's a message that I've been trying to tell myself as well, is that life, every time we do something new, we feel like a fraud. That imposter comes in.
Yeah.
And we could all then just go sit back on our lounge and watch Netflix, I guess, and we wouldn't have that feeling. But then
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't have this wonderful opportunity and be impacting so many people's lives by, if you're sitting on your lounge or taking your medication and continuing your hectic, crazy life that wasn't fulfilling anyway. So I think that's just such a wonderful example of having opportunity, but you also have to take action. If you hadn't have
Mm-hmm.
jumped in that car, you would have never met Chip and your other partner, and you would never have gotten there. So That's fabulous. And I must say, starting a podcast, exactly the same. Who am I to do a podcast? Why would anyone even want to get on my podcast? Who will I send emails to? People like yourself who, why not? You just do it, and then it's amazing who will say yes and who will help you once you actually get out there and start doing things. So we're
That's
all
right.
imposters.
And we're all imposters right up until the moment where we're not, right?
Yep. And then if you have that mindset, often you're on your next imposter journey as soon as you feel like there's that little sense of, oh, this is comfortable. I know what I'm doing now. I know. Let's do something else. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been really, I think, inspiring for people listening. And I know for myself, so many of the things that you brought up, the idea of that there might be a need for that space in terms of taking time to learn something new or to figure out what you want to do, that's okay, that we have a second adulthood, if you like, after 50, and there is so much opportunity to do things differently then. And there are places such as MEA where you can have wonderful experiences to maybe join a community and learn. So where can people find out more about MEA and opportunities to learn?
Join our website on meawisdom.com. And what's fascinating is we have a huge community of people who've done our programs online and in real life in Australia. For whatever reason, it's really, really interesting. So yeah, come and check it out there and see what you find.
Wonderful. I'll leave that link in the show notes. So thank you, Jeff. I do really appreciate your time today.
You too, Kim. Thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you. Bye-bye.
Okay.